Well, good evening to you. This evening we will be in Job chapter 35. We're going to continue on with Elihu's message to Job. In a little over a month, I will be 59 years old. Woo! And I know to some of you, I'm still a child. I'm young, I'm wet behind the ears. To some of you, I'm getting pretty close to being old. You know, it depends on your perspective. I've lived these 59 years right here. I live like a mile and a half from the house I grew up in. I have worked at the same job almost my entire adult life. I've had one wife. I speak one language. She's disappointed I don't speak Klingon, but I really only speak one language. I have a pretty small view of the world. You know, I don't see very much of it. I can't tell you what it's like to live in a desert or in a jungle or in the mountains. In this chapter, Elihu is going to challenge Job's perspective on God's justice. Does he have a big enough view of justice? You know, Job and his friends believe that God is just. They believe that God is greater than man. They believe that God is sovereign. Romans 8:28 says, you know, God works all things together for those who are called according to his purpose. So who defines what good means? Is it my definition? You know, if it's my definition, then someone's got some explaining to do. I kind of feel like Job. Things ain't working out the way I think they should. I'd say that's kind of where Job is. His circumstances don't really fit his definition of justice. You know, and I think we would agree that good, as it's in here, has a much higher meaning than just what's convenient for me, just simply what I want. The first of this month, we had a rather large oak tree fall down in our backyard. That's not good. I have a chainsaw. Right? That's good. But my chainsaw isn't very big. That's not so good. Fortunately, there are some people here in church that have a bigger chainsaw than I do. That's good. They were willing to come to my house and cut on this tree. That's even better. That's really good, you know? And, you know, it's going to help keep some people warm this winter. That's good. There's more good there, you know? You know, I could just focus on the one thing. The tree fell. That was bad. Or you can step back and see a bigger picture. And again, I think that's kind of where Elihu is trying to take Job, to see more than just him, his own circumstances. You know, God created this universe that is so large, man is unable to see the beginning from the end. You know, Colossians says that Jesus holds the universe together. Every little bit, every little piece of it is in his command. He works it all together. That's a big picture. And again, I think Elihu is trying to help Job see something bigger than just his circumstance. The chapter's kind of in two parts and kind of deals with two questions. Elihu's going to, you know, he kind of asks the question, and because he's such a nice guy, he's going to answer the question for Job. And again, he's challenging what Job has said previously. He's challenging some of the ways that he thinks. Let me read. This is Job chapter 35 and the first 8 verses. And Elihu answered and said, "Do you think this to be just? Do you say, it is my right before God that you ask, what advantage have I? How am I better off than if I had sinned? I will answer you and your friends with you. Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness concerns a man like yourself, and your righteousness a son of man. It's like, Job, think about what you said. Do you have the right to question the justice of God? In some translations, it says, instead of "it is my right before God," it says Job says he is more righteous than God. And he has questioned God. I mean, he looks at his circumstances and he asks if God is right. And he also asks, I've been this upright man, and here I am suffering. What good did doing righteous be? What would it have mattered if I had sinned or had not sinned? And that's the question Elihu is going to answer. Job looks at himself and says, I've been this good man, and yet I suffer. He's not suffering just a little bit. He's lost his wealth, his children, his health, his reputation. Again, his circumstances just don't fit in with his idea of God's justice. Job has pointed out throughout his speeches that he has seen with his own eyes the wicked prosper over the righteous. He's been a man who's given counsel to people. He's given trusted counsel to people. Now, it's personal. He's the one in the fire. And I think, even that changes his perspective, makes it much more personal than if he's just giving someone else advice. In chapter 19, Job says, Job declares that I know my Redeemer lives. He says his hope is in God. And I think he holds to that throughout the book of Job. He just doesn't understand, why he's suffering. Again, it just doesn't fit with his ideas of God and God's justice. That leaves him with these questions of, is God unjust? Or is Job's understanding of justice wrong? Is it too small? Is it too narrow? So does sin matter? Let's look at what Elihu says. He says, first, look up. Look at the heavens. Consider the greatness of God. Be reminded of how big God is. Also mentions these clouds, and behold the clouds which are higher than you. Clouds obscure our view. I think he's referring to the fact that our understanding of God is limited. God is bigger than us, and maybe so big, we can't always understand him. Can I add value to God in my righteousness? Do I hinder God's work in my sin? He seems to say no to that. Our sin affects us. Our righteousness affects us. Our sin affects the people around us. Our righteousness affects the people around us. If you look through Job, through this book, if you look at his life, his righteousness has been a benefit to those around him. He has ensured justice is done in the world that he lives in. He's generous. His counsel was trustworthy. He's a respected man. The guys that have come and helped me, there's been a benefit to that. We were sending a group to Guatemala. They will be a benefit to the people that they serve. He limits his answer, to the physical world. I don't particularly think he says that because he sees God as, separated from the world, that God is too high to care about what goes on down here. To me, I think his point is he's trying to get Job to see something more than his own benefit for his own righteousness. Because that seems to be what Job is mostly concerned about. Like, look beyond yourself. Job's righteousness, again, was a benefit to the world around him. In a sense, he was part of God's justice in the world that he lived in. Even in his suffering, a right attitude and his actions, were a benefit to the world around him. I think he's trying to get Job to see that God is at work in a bigger arena than Job sees right now. Like, open your eyes a little wider and look around a little more, Job. This concerns more than just you. God is at work, everywhere. Again, he kind of deals with sin just in a small way, I think. Because, does sin matter? It's like, well, yes, it does. The wages of sin is death. God says he is a jealous God. God hates sin. God is not a distant, uncaring God. He cares about that. Sin grieves God. Sin separates us from God. It causes our hearts to be hardened. So there is an effect on sin between us and God. Our righteousness shows the worthiness of God. That is us being his light in this world. Now it's true, we cannot do enough good things that God would owe us anything. I think that view of sin not affecting God is somehow an expression of God's equal treatment to one another. He's not easily swayed. He doesn't owe me just because I came to church this morning. Again, Elihu is asking Job to think on these things. Does he have enough understanding to question the justice of God? And that to see that God is concerned with more than just Job. God cares about individual justice. God cares about big justice, universal justice. And we may never be able to reconcile those two. But we're called to trust him even when we don't understand. Even when you don't understand him, when we don't see how his justice is working, when we don't see good, we're still called to trust him. So the second half of the chapter also deals with justice. If someone's being oppressed, if someone is suffering and it's not their own cause, and that person cried out to God, doesn't it make sense that God would answer that cry? That God would deliver them? There are millions of people around the world suffering just simply because of where they were born. Their last name, their religion, the color of their skin. There's all kinds of reasons people are being oppressed right now. And from a human perspective, it doesn't really look like justice. And Elihu is going to give some possible reasons why the cry of the oppressed may not be answered. So let me read 9 through 16. Because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out. They call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But none says, "Where is God, my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of heaven?" There they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evil men. How much less when you say, surely God does not hear an empty cry, and nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less when you say that you do not see him, that the case is before him and you are waiting for him. And now his anger does not punish, and he does not take much note of transgression. Job opens his mouth with empty talk. He multiplies his words without knowledge. So again, there's this question of if a person's being oppressed and they cry out to God, shouldn't God deliver them? There's a human perspective that would look at that and say, yes, that makes sense. But Elihu gives some reasons why God may not answer that. Right? The first reason in verses 10 and 11, right? But none say, "Where is God, my maker?" The first reason is that some prayers are selfish. Right? There's no seeking of God, no longing for his comfort, his wisdom, just a fleshly desire to escape pain. There's one reason: selfishness. Again, that I'm not interested in God. I'm just interested in my problem. Again, I want to define good the way I define good. I want it answered the way I want it answered. I don't need God in my life. I just need this problem out of my life. There's one reason that those prayers are not answered. Verse 12, he says, "There they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evil men." Right? Pride. Right? And there's more than one kind of pride. There's the pride in a job well done. There's, a sort of satisfaction. There's pride in the accomplishment of others, a joy in what they have done. Then there is a pride that God hates. A pride that is rooted in selfishness and conceit, right? A puffed up ego and overestimation of oneself. Right? God hates pride. He resists the proud. And pride in man is such a resilient thing. You can take a person, you can take everything away from them. You can take their health, their wealth, their friends, their family, their hope, and yet pride can still be there. I've certainly seen that in people. Pride says, "I don't need God." It is a form of faithlessness that rejects God. And a lie who says God does not answer because of pride. Again, much like the first one, I think I just want to be out of this problem. And I want it done my way, and I want it done right now. In verse 13, he also says that God does not hear or regard an empty prayer. I suppose an empty prayer is a faithless prayer, or perhaps a prayer that's just aimed to whoever might be listening. That's probably an empty prayer. And he says God does not hear or regard that. If you're just praying to nobody, again, it's about relationship. If it's not about a relationship with God, God may not answer that prayer. Verses 14 through 16 are aimed right at Job. If God doesn't answer a selfish or prideful or empty prayers, and he's kind of saying Job is even worse. Job has said that he doesn't see God. Previously he said, "I looked behind me, I didn't see God. I looked in front of me, I didn't see God." And he's tired of waiting, right? The case is before him and you are waiting for him. He's tired of waiting. And Job's frustration and lack of patience leads to just more empty words. Even when we don't see God, or we don't feel like God is present, God sees us. We can't hide from God. It's not that God is indifferent to man's suffering. Oftentimes it's man is indifferent to God. I don't see that indifference in Job. It's like, yes, he's frustrated, he's angry, he's tired. He hasn't followed his wife's advice to, curse God and die. He's fighting for his faith, It's not always pretty, but he's not letting go of that. I know my Redeemer lives. He's fighting. When we suffer, especially when it lasts for an extended period, something I see in myself is the tendency to focus on just that one issue, that one problem, to focus on the hurt and nothing else. I see a selfishness in me that is not pretty. And we need those reminders of, perspective and of how big a picture that there is to see God as bigger than just our problem. We need to be reminded that God is faithful, that God is trustworthy. And again, I see Elihu trying to do those things with Job, of preparing him to hear from God, to say, Job, you need to stop and think about these things. You need to stop and think if you're right. You need to stop and see a bigger picture than what you're looking at right now. And I suppose if he gives 3 reasons prayers aren't answered, we can look at that. So we can turn those around and say, these are the types of prayers we should be praying. We should be praying prayers that are seeking God first, that are seeking simply his comfort. He talks about, where is God my maker who gives songs in the night? Songs in the night are comfort. Are we seeking peace from God? Are we seeking his wisdom? Are we seeking his knowledge? Are we humbling ourselves? Are we humble before God when we come in prayer? Again, are we seeking him? Are we not demanding what we want, but relying on what he has for us? And not empty prayers, and prayers that are patient. Because oftentimes we end up waiting on God longer than we would like to. But again, it goes back to that bigger picture of God is at work. He's at work at more than just my life. He's in work in more than just your life. He's intertwining all these things together to do good. And we may not always understand what good is. We may never see the good. But God is trustworthy. God is worth us waiting on and worth the pain and the things that we go through. There is a reward waiting. So would you pray with me? So Father, we just praise you. Father, I praise you for your greatness. You are sovereign over everything, and you are just, and you are not a distant God who does not care. So Father, help us in times of trial to remember these things, to not become selfish, but to remain humble and to remain people who seek you out. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.